now. All right, recording in progress. That means we are in progress. What's up, everyone? Welcome, everybody, to our latest Gen GMs recording. That person right over there is Zach Clay.
That's Greg Curry Wilson.
That's
Why
me.
was I gonna say that's Greg Clay?
That's Greg Clay. I was like, wow. Listen, we're clearly brothers. I think
We're
we can
clearly,
clearly demonstrate that.
yeah.
Yeah, so we're here. We're ready. We are recording on St. Patrick's Day. I have what is completely
Oh, that's right.
impossible to see. This is actually an extraordinarily dark green.
Mm,
But I also had pesto for dinner, so I think that helps because that's green and
does
um,
help.
yeah,
Does
you know.
help. That's good.
So happy St.
I
Patty's Day to all who
Yeah,
celebrate.
it is for me at least 7 p.m. and how I find it kind of funny that you saying this just now is my first actual acknowledgement that, oh yeah, today is St. Patrick's Day. I literally have had nothing else this entire day that reminded me of that.
Like I have almost nothing that's like dress clothing worthy for teaching that's green, so I had to
Mhm.
take this green bandana and like put it
Wear
in
it
my
over your
bag.
face. Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, well, yeah, right, exactly. I just did the Bjorn Borg, like whatever. But I was like, dude, I don't even, and my students, like a couple of them are wearing green sweatpants or whatever, but like, it's not,
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
it's not a big thing.
yeah.
Because St.
I
John's is
no.
all about the red because they're in the NCAA
Right.
tournament. They're a number 2 seed, 30-4. Won the Big East tournament for the first time in 25 years. So it's big doings right now at St. John's. So you know, it's good
Sports,
stuff.
sports, 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 sports.
Yeah, I know. It's the excitement of sports for everybody. But thank you for
Um,
all those who have tuned in and have
yeah.
listened to us and all that. And yeah, how you been, Zach? Since I spoke to
Uh, I've been good. Lots been going on. I had a big trip recently that you know about,
you.
and
Indeed.
perhaps other people will know about soon. Um, yeah, no, life's been good. I'm getting into starting up my own content. My brother is helping me produce some stuff. I've done Twitch streams for a long time about role play, whether it's like talking about D&D or highlighting the RP communities of like World of Warcraft or Minecraft and stuff.
Uh-huh.
I've always done these Twitch streams, but then never like stored them as long form content, let alone edited them as something that is watchable long form, unlike a Twitch stream, really. So we're working to try to make that happen, but um, yeah, hopefully that'll happen soon. And then I am going to Gen Con this year. We were just talking about Gen Con, so that should be fun. That's going to be
Very
a
exciting.
first. Um, and otherwise, yeah, just every weekend still this kids program, and then during the week I have my local middle school and high school that I help out at, and yeah, it's just really cool seeing D&D through these kids' eyes, and man, it's always so surprising to me every weekend when I go out to the city and run D&D. Today, this or yesterday, really, I had a table of 8 kids who were roughly 10 years old on average, and they all love when I DM for them, and they do all this sort of stuff. And I've gone out of my way to get like really cool niche indie RPGs, like indie RPG zines and stuff of
Yeah.
like Perils and Princesses or Home, which is a kaiju mech battle TTRPG,
I think I've
or
heard of that
yeah.
actually. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it. It's very hard. It's scaled a bit too hard in my opinion. It needs some doctoring, but it's a good system. So I have or Never Stop Blowing Up, which is a cool like adaptation on kids on bikes. And so I have every week I show up and I'm like, "Hey kids, I have this new cool thing," or like Honey Heist. All
Oh, Honey
these
Heist.
things that I've
Yeah.
tried to introduce to the kids.
Great stuff.
Every single time I try to introduce these kids who have their D&D character sheets folded nicely in front of them. I'm like, look at this cool thing. You get to play a bear, or look, you can be a mech and fight a kaiju. Every time they're like, no, we want to play D&D. And they refuse, absolutely refuse to try anything new, which is so surprising to me. And so the only ways that I've gotten this to work is by sneakily including a the tabletop game that I'm trying to introduce them to as a mini game.
Like in a
And then
portal. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Like you just
So I'm like, okay, you guys, I did this with Never Stop Blowing Up. And so I was like, you guys enter this combat scenario. And then I passed out new sheets and they're like, what's this? And then I explain it. But then, of course, as soon as they start playing it, and then as soon as I'm getting through the mechanics and how the game works, then they're like, this is amazing. But then the next time, I literally yesterday tried to introduce them to mech versus kaiju game and showed them awesome colored pictures of the mechs they can choose from, and they were like, "No, we want to play D&D." Anyway, so that's my plight.
Maybe
I
what you got to do is it's the gateway drug thing, though, right? You got to. I mean, maybe unfortunate when dealing with young people, but
yeah,
like,
maybe
never
not
mind.
with
I
kids.
apologize unreservedly. No, but like, no, it's no, like you have to show them like some awesome fantasy thing that isn't D&D. Like if Blades in the Dark is too dark, maybe, but you
hmm
could like Tales of the Valiant or like some
Daggerheart
like
soon enough when that comes out.
fantasy adjacent, you know,
Yeah.
thing because there's like beta rules for that are available too, like
hmm
some kind of like fantasy adjacent thing, and then you can gradually pull them into the now that you've seen this, you can
Yeah.
and I want to be clear to my friends Mike Underwood and Brandon O'Brien. I see you, okay? Because I'm helping you out by talking about how you can convince them to do other things because I could just see them being like, it's because the only thing they know is D&D and blah 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 blah. And
I
then,
mean,
you know.
actually, that's kind of true. I feel like it's an age thing. That it's just so consistent. Their response is like, no, we want to stick with the thing that we already understand. I'm surprised by the fear of trying new things.
It's music to Watsy's ears, probably though, right? Like if the young
Yeah,
people are saying that,
sure.
it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not just grognards. It's not the old,
hmm
aged people
Yeah,
that are like,
there's a whole generation of kids nowadays. It's funny. I'll see these tweets occasionally where there's a certain part of the community that's like modern D&D is not D&D anymore, and sure there are many things that have changed in this current edition that are a far cry from D&D of the 80s and 70s and so on. But like these kids play D&D all the time. They love it. They're addicted to it. The modern version, it's great.
yeah,
And there are many things that I love about it as well. Many things that I would change and things I do love about older versions, but that's neither here nor there. That was all an answer to how are you doing? So how are you doing, Greg?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Family's been doing well. A lot of personal, professional stuff that's potentially going well. We were talking just before we went live
hmm
about how like there's a bunch of stuff that we're like can't talk about it yet. Just
Yeah.
but the way I liken it to, which is rather unfortunate given current circumstances, but landing the planes all safely. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Landing the plane safely. And as it is right now, there's a lot of planes that are coming into land and everything looks fine. But until we get touchdown,
Right.
on the runway,
hmm
we're still in the air. But
Yep.
for the most part, no complaints. I have been very happy that I've been able to get some stuff done in terms of like storytelling, world building stuff at my university, which has been very cool. Ran a storytelling event with the lovely folks Brandon O'Brien and Marie Bilodeau and
hmm
Brian Talwara at my university. That went really well. So like that also has been very cool. And then we have, of course, next month we've got the Hearthglow finale coming up,
hmm
which you're in, and which Carlos Hernandez and Claire Cooney and Adam Petrosino are in. And that's going to be super cool. That's going to be at Sacred Heart University. Those of you who are in the Southern Connecticut area, that will be Sacred Heart in Fairfield County.
hmm
It'll be at the Shine Auditorium Friday, April 11th from 4 to 8 p.m. Eastern. Tickets are going to be going on sale for that pretty soon, I think, but it's part of their official Literary Spring list of events. So it's going to be in a black box theater, and it's going to be super cool. I am very excited for that finale. I love doing these live events. So yeah, that's going to be cool. So yeah, I have no complaints about that
Amazing.
stuff. And I got a question for you, by the way.
So it begins.
That's what we do. So
hmm
my question actually is very tied into what we were talking about earlier about
Okay.
things that don't quite go right. So I want to ask you, do you have a story about, or can you remember a time where things in your campaign went entirely off the rails in some way, and how you put them back on the rails? How did you swerve back onto the track? Now, when I say off the rails, I don't necessarily
hmm
mean that like the power went out, someone punched someone in the face, and then jumped out a window. I mean, like, like a situation where they just zigged way out of the way and you were like, oh God, like I didn't mean for you to face the Tarask now, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
How did you put that back on the track? And is there something we can kind of glean from that, about how to get campaigns back in order or sessions back in order when they go off the rails?
Yeah. I may have mentioned, there's a few that come to mind. Something I've realized too is the importance of writing things down. It's funny, whenever the whenever I finish a game, especially games that I'm running virtually, I'll finish a session and then we'll have our, post session discussions and stuff. And we'll be like, okay, thanks everyone. And, I'll end the Zoom call or the Discord call or whatever. And that would be the perfect time to remain sitting and write down what just happened in the session as a
Yeah.
GM. I don't do that. The moment that the meeting ends, or
You're out.
even when I'm a player, I do this. The moment the meeting ends, I click the button. I'm like, and I will jump from my chair, leave the room, and run as far as I can.
Yeah.
In-person games, I have an easier time with. I think it's just sitting in front of screens for so long. But um, anyway, this all to say, I would probably remember better. I have a handful of stories that are very easy for me to call offhand, and I guess one that comes to mind that I may have mentioned before when running for a group of kids in San Francisco was sometimes they'll or yeah, actually it probably would be best if I just mentioned something that happened 2 weeks ago or a week
Okay.
ago, because honestly, when you're running for kids that are 10 years old, things go off the rails literally every session. So,
Well, before you go on, I remember you telling
mhm,
once on a GenGM show about the person who was really freaked out about something that was either attacking her or attacking a like a pet rabbit or something like that, and was like really freaked out and was
mm,
like, I can't stay, like I have to leave. And you were like, okay, okay. And then you figured out a way to keep her from freaking out and leaving the table because she was so
right.
scared about something you didn't expect would be scary. I remember
Yeah.
that for an example, but I don't remember what the thing was in particular that he was scared
I
about.
don't either. I
Yeah, it was
don't
some
either.
months ago. I was impressed
I
with how you handled it, but anyway.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
Some other detail of the situation would probably jog my memory, but nothing comes to mind at the moment.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm gonna go.
Either way, though, I mean, even I think 2 weeks ago, kind of what I've been doing with the kids that I have had at the current San Francisco program, these 10-year-olds, is I will have one of the campaign setting books that we have on hand is the Taldore campaign setting.
Tell Puri,
Uh,
the
the
Indian food,
Talpore,
you know.
yeah. Um, that is, of course, Exandria Matt Mercer's setting from
Yep.
Critical Role, and that has an awesome map in it. And so I pull out the map of Taldore because kids love the visual references, and I put it in the middle of the table. And in the last 2 weeks, I've had like 7 to 8 kids at the table for a D&D session, which is too much, by the way. Don't do this
Yep.
unless you're a professional
Yep.
like me. But even if you're a professional like me, also don't do it.
Still don't do it. Yeah, no, no
Yeah,
kidding.
I should follow my own advice. But they look at the map, and I'm like, we always start, and I play this old wizard who is a bit, crotchety and always, dramatizes everything. And so he's like, well, there's several adventures out on this map today, and they kind of point where they want to go, or they go with ideas, and I just kind of follow where they want to go. So 2 weeks ago, they wanted to go to an icy area, and so I came up with an idea that there was a frost giant that was disturbing a local tribe of people, and that's all they knew. Like a quest was being a quest had come to their bounty board saying, wanted frost giants for terrorizing
Okay.
our community, whatever.
Cool.
And
I dig
so
it.
they went to that location, and I suppose as well as it can go with off the rails, um, the kids arrived, and I described this big like hill that resembled a skull, so like two holes carved in it, and it's sort of covered in ice, and that's like the giant's hideout. And at first, I wanted to have an encounter outside of the giant's hideout that involved like an abominable yeti. And so, as yetis are one of the very few used or not often used monsters in the back of the monster manual.
True.
And so I was like, okay, I had a feeling that the week before these kids wanted a lot of combat, so let me throw them against a yeti or something like that. But then, kind of feeling the vibe at the table, the yeti comes out, and immediately two of the players who were sitting to my left were like, can we be friends with him?" And So then in my head, I'm like, well, this was supposed to be combat. But so then I remembered Monsters Inc. Look, great artists, good artists
There you
copy, great
go.
artists
So it's
steal.
like,
So
rah,
yeah,
oh.
yes. So I had the Yeti come out,
Awesome.
and I described him pushing a snowball, a giant snowball boulder, and then when it came to a stop, he like tapped it with his hand, and some snow came off, and then a stand like a countertop came out of the rock, and it was a his boulder was a merchant stall. He's like, anyone want some tea or some snow cones or and so I had them each order their favorite food, but in snow form. So they had snow pasta, and one kid wanted a giant snow cone, and he was like, "How big you want it?" And then she was like, just going like this, and he was like, "No problem." And anyway, that all to say, things go off the rails all the time, and by in the sense that I was expecting them to fight this thing, and then I think I wanted the frost giant to instead be like a moral dilemma. Maybe the frost giant was like recovering some valuable relic, and he was the last of his kind. And so the local community, which I actually had not determined up until that point, I planned it for to be the Yetis or something. Maybe the Yetis are actually the bad guy, and they're requesting the giant be killed, but then they
Yeah.
find out it's the opposite. So, I basically flipped that idea on its head when they arrived and they wanted the Yetis to be friendly. So yeah, I guess broadly though, when it comes to like putting things back on the rails, if they go off the rails, I mean, a tenet that I always follow is, and it's actually something that I'm very curious about too, is you'll some players will never know if there's a necessary plot device that you're going to make happen no matter what. Like, this NPC will die, even if they
Right.
ask the NPC to come with them on the adventure in an effort to protect him from dying. Some other thing will happen to make him die,
Yep.
or
Yep.
it's like a prophecy. Um, and so I do that from time to time. Like if I have a plan, like, okay, this needs to happen by this date, no matter where they are or what they're doing. This dragon needs to fly overhead and breathe fire because it's important in the story. Doesn't matter if they've gone in this cave for this quest or if they've actually gone to the dragon's lair or if they're in town. I will find a way to make a dragon breathing fire make sense. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I would say that the rails are put down as the campaign goes. Have some of the best ways to have fun at the table is following the ideas that the players have, and oftentimes I do like when players mention crazy cool ideas like, oh my god, guys, what if the butler's actually the one that did it? And then I'm like, oh yeah, what if the butler's actually the one
Yeah.
that did
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know and then I always consider that stuff, and I don't want to always feed into their ideas in that way, but I don't know. Yeah, I tend to find that the rails is the story that we make along the way, and if there are things that I feel are necessary, then I'll make them fit in as we go. Um, but yeah, no, yeah, things go off the rails all the time. If your question is, has there ever been a moment where things go off the rails, and how do you get it back on? That's where I live on the rails,
Well,
and
but what I
yeah.
meant by the rails though was not railroading. What I meant
Hmm.
was if something just goes wrong. Like
Mm,
if there's two people that are like, you assume they're going to want to have combat, right? And
hmm.
then the thing happens and the person like fires an arrow directly into the head of the Yeti and is just like, and the other person's like, how could you do that? And like there's this big back and forth. Like
Oh,
I meant off the rails in terms of
in more
you
of
set
an
up a
out of character
situation.
sense.
Say again.
So off the
No, not
rails. Mm,
necessarily. It's that, you know, you scale a combat wrong, so all of a sudden
oh,
there's a TPK
uh-huh.
or close. Or
Yeah.
you scale something where you think this thing's going to obviously seem like an enemy, but instead like half of them are like, no, it's not an enemy. Like
Hmm.
that's fine if you can do what you did, which is the whole snow cone thing. I'm not so much talking about railroading. I'm talking about when literally like it ends up you feel like you've not lost control of it, but that it's
Yeah.
gone in a direction which could be problematic that you hadn't planned in terms of not just the story, but in
Mm,
terms of like what you thought was going to happen did not happen, and now people are potentially upset or just
mm.
things are not, or they kill a critical NPC that you're like, oh God, how do I replace the king of the whatchamacallit? That sort of thing.
Hmm.
So that's what I know.
Well, yeah. I've only think I've had one near TPK or one like very significant character death, which was among the very first campaign I ever ran almost 10 years ago, which does not sound like very long. But almost 10 years ago is when I first started DMing. And the very first campaign I ran, I threw kind of like the first actual real quest that the players had was to go to leave the city and to take out a goblin camp that was terrorizing the city. And the goblins were led by a bugbear. And this was their first big like boss fight, essentially. Like
Okay.
they dealt with goblins outside the camp, went into the lair at the center of the camp, and had to fight a bugbear. And this must have been like 2016 or so. And through the course of the fight, there is one character, my dear friend Elijah, who was playing a tiefling bard and did not know at the time that it's a bad idea to make Constitution your dump stat. Um,
Oh boy.
put his 8 in Constitution and was also kind of in the forefront in the battle, and his character died in combat, and none of us were expecting it. And
Wow.
so I just don't remember, and I wasn't planning for that to happen. I don't think any DM necessarily plans for character deaths to happen unless the character deaths are a part of the story propelling the story forward somehow, like a underworld campaign. But I don't know. I don't tend to. There haven't been too many situations where something has gone super wrong in the course of the story that has created issues then for the players. I mean, the big example that I think about is the story I've told many times of the skeletal kobold that two characters really liked, and from my expression, was supposed to be like a friendly, wacky little sidekick companion, this skeletal kobold who all the other kobolds raided the village, but this one skeletal kobold stayed back and did not attack the villagers, and then was apprehended, and then given the deal that if he this kobold escorts the adventurers to the dragon's lair, that the kobold will go free. And then, of course, as I've told this story before, two of the players, he's like, yeah, of course, I'll just take you guys right there, and then the deal's done. And they loved this guy, but then one player was just suspicious the whole time and wanted to kill the kobold and all this stuff. Um, in that situation, the kobold ended up getting killed, and then it spawned this whole argument and disagreement at the table of the two players realizing, how could you kill our favorite NPC?
Yeah,
He
yeah.
did nothing wrong. Um, I don't know. I think it just means that there are going to be discussions and difficult moments that come up in any campaign in any story. I don't know. I just tend to find that I try to be prepared for anything. I think part of the code of D&D that I have accepted before I even sit down to DM is that whatever I think will happen may not happen. And so I
Right.
just always have to be ready to adapt to things like that. And that I
Right.
guess comes with it skills and improvisation. But um yeah, I haven't had too many situations where some some unexpected or wrong thing has happened that then caused this huge schism at the table or something like that. Maybe that's a testament to my players' ability to work things out, or my
Could be.
ability as a GM to arbitrate conversations and discussions, or to adapt on the fly. But um, yeah, no, I guess yeah, things happen all the time where unexpected. I had character deaths that, ironically, the same character that was killed by the bugbear. Years later, we reprised the campaign, and that character and another character were both killed at the same time later.
By the same
And so,
bugbear?
by not by the same bugbear, but by
Okay.
an Etten this time, I think.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
kind of in the family.
Okay.
But it just fed into a resurrection story, which was kind of had echoes of the first resurrection
Yeah,
story.
yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I feel like I'm still kind of not answering your question, but
No, no, no. I think
yeah.
you are. I mean, I want to say quickly that I liked what you
Mhm,
said quite a bit about the idea of improving and being able to adapt in the fly, because I think
mhm,
that obviously is a real key. And one thing, and this is a little bit controversial because I think there is a school of thought that says you have a world, you have a story that's unfolding in a certain way. You want your characters to influence that story, to influence the world, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't want to do what essentially you were talking about when you answered the question the first time, which is to literally just alter the nature of the story.
Mm.
So the Yeti is an evil Yeti, and he stays an evil Yeti, and he's a problem that they're going to have to deal with one way or the other. Not he's an evil Yeti, and the minute they're like, oh, he's really cute, can we like hang out with him? He's like, he's not an evil Yeti, he's a cute Yeti. Like I can imagine some people being like, that is like,
Yeah.
that's
And
violating the
that's,
themes of the. But what you're doing is
yeah.
overwhelmingly better on every level, and I'll tell you why. For people who are watching, it's extremely important. We've talked many times about how the problem with railroading is that there's a difference between being a novelist and being a dungeon master, in that a novelist is a largely single mind production with the help of editors and everything and beta readers, but it's you mostly comprising it. And the other one is one where it's a collaborative story. So we've talked about that a bunch of times. But the thing I think that's important here is if you're tying together everything with theme, as you all know, I've said many times on this show, and you've addressed the question of theme, then it shouldn't matter if the Yeti's a bad guy or a good guy. If the theme that is coming across is we need to be able to assess situations without jumping to conclusions based on pre-established biases or based on what the quest giver at the tavern told us. Now, that may not be a theme in Zac's campaign, but the point is, if that is a theme, then it doesn't matter if Zac planned to have them fight the Yeti and then decided at the last second, no, I'm not going to have him fight the Yeti. Now he's a merchant. Who cares? The real question is, can you make it seamless? Can you make it seem
Yeah.
as if this Yeti is 100% the other way? That's why people in video games are always like, I want to go to YouTube and see what the other ending is and
Hmm.
see, like, would he have done something totally different? And the answer is maybe he would have done something totally different because the party was different. So I want to, like, commend what you did there because it's exactly what I try to do as well. I try to roll with the suggestions that are being given and often go in a radically different direction. Now, if I've already presented a villain as a villain and the villain has done villainous things in front of the party and like kicked puppies and hurt babies, I'm not then going to be like, but truly he just wanted to work with, he wanted to be a woodworker. And that's yeah, I'm not
Just a
going to do,
phase.
yeah, it's just a, exactly. He was going through his tough period. Like I'm not going to do that, right? Like at that point you've established it. But if you have not established it for the party, who cares what the actual thing is that he was? Because you are ultimately directing that based on the player. So I agree with you. I think that is the way to do it. But I think there is a segment of people that would say that's not being true to the, whatever. And like, I think what you're talking about is a much better way to approach it. So that was one thing. Um, and the other thing was just sort of a quick note about, because I have 3 stories like this. I won't tell them unless you want to hear them. But um, going off the rails also is as much about how you catch your balance as it is about whether you lose your balance in the first place. And for this, I'm going to tell a non-D&D story. So my mother was in the traveling company, The Sound of Music. She was a Broadway actress. And in the 60s, she was with some of the original Sound of Music performers on the national tour. Like you have a national tour of Wicked and all that. She was on the national tour of the Sound of Music. So she was at this one regional playhouse. She was in the chorus. She was playing one of the nuns. And there's this sequence where all the nuns walk across in the monastery, or in the nunnery rather, and they're doing this, "O Beate Requiem," right? Like that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But it was being played by a record player, 1960s, right?
Yeah.
And the record player was set too slow. So as they're walking across, it's right? And they're like going across with that. So then somebody in the back clearly panics and realizes, oh, this is wrong, and adjusts it. So then it goes, it was too fast, right? So my mom and the rest of the people on stage are like, oh, what a nightmare. Like these people are going to be like, because again, this is a professional production
Oh
that people are
no.
going to see, right? They're going to be like, what the hell is this? They had no idea. They had zero idea. They didn't know anything was wrong. They were just like, some of them, one or two people were overheard to say like, oh, it sounded a little strange, but it was really cool to see the visuals. Or like they were paying no real attention to it other than that. oh, they're singing and the nuns are walking and they didn't break. None of the actors were like, oh, we're really sorry, we'll fix that. Like none of that stuff. They stayed on task. Which and what that proves is audiences are much, much, much more forgiving than you might think, and in fact may not even be aware, so long
Mm,
as you do not make it a, oh my God, I'm sorry, that was a terrible screw up on my part, right?
yeah,
And so in this particular situation we're talking about, like when you do in quotes go off the rails, the key is not to immediately panic because they may not even know that that happened,
right.
because they may not even realize that something has gone in a direction that you had not expected. They will just roll with it. Even if you screw up, even if you introduced someone as like, you know, Stephen, Stephen Franklin Jones, the worst guy in the world, blah, blah, blah. And then later on, you call him Franklin Stephen Jones by
Yeah.
accident because you
Sorry
forgot
to
his name.
all Stephen Franklin Joneses out there, by the way,
Yeah,
if you're
yeah, yeah.
listening.
My apologies to all the Franklin Jones. But like, like, and then you accidentally reverse the name. So next time it's Franklin Stephen Jones or whatever. The
Yeah.
overwhelming majority of times, players are either not going to remember, or if they do, they'll correct you gently and you'll go on, or they won't notice, or they'll think they made some mistake or
Hmm.
something, and it won't be a big deal if you don't make it a big deal. So that I
Yeah.
guess is just some general note I wanted to make about what you had to say about that idea.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioning that definitely. First, a couple things. So with the in regards to the Yeti thing, I will admit, of course, that when I run for kids, my tendency to go with their ideas is much higher than when I am running professional campaigns for paying clients or adults or whatever. Um, because the purpose of why we are playing is different, and the not only is the purpose of why we're playing slightly different, which, well, maybe the purpose is the same. It's kind of all of it. I mean, it's
because the
all
adults
to
don't
have fun.
because the adults don't go along with it the same way as the kids do, right? They
That
are
they
more
don't.
likely to do the call of adventure and
Yes,
follow the clues you lay down than the kids would be, right?
yes, yeah. Yeah, they're all there to have fun, but I guess when I'm running for kids, I'm also thinking about like some of the things that you mentioned regarding theme, where I don't necessarily plan a theme ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
I just have common themes that I think would be useful for them to know at their age or to be exposed to. I have those banked in my head and then am prepared to execute them in any number of permutations possible. Whether it's the giant is the misunderstood one or the Yetis are, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some cases though where I really, value putting my foot down and making sure that something is the way that it is, regardless of how things go. Um, but then, yeah, as far as the smoke and mirrors of DMing, in that, hey, if you make a mistake or if something is going off the rails in a way that you didn't expect, as long as your poise is high enough, they may never know. Yeah,
Right,
no, I live by that creed,
right.
definitely. I'm 100% poise
And
and
you're
like, okay,
granted
great.
that poise, incidentally,
Mhm.
due to the trust that you built with the players, which we've talked
Right.
about before.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I have been I am usually rather humble. Um, but I will admit just this once that I have been complimented on several occasions after delivering. Like I've been an MC at various celebrations. I the MC of the ceremony of my brother's wedding, along with my brother's wife's brother as well. It was the two brothers leading everything. But I've done many events. I mean, I was a drum major in high school and led the whole band for various occasions of all sorts of things, led drumline competitions as an instructor and educator. I've been kind of at the forefront of leadership of many situations, and I've always had people, or not always, but had people walk up to me afterwards and compliment me, like, "Oh, great job leading such and such thing." And then on each separate occasion, I've had maybe almost 10 times in my life where people have complimented me specifically on my poise, which was
Mhm.
that, what a strangely specific word for all these random people to use.
Yep.
Um, so I think that is one of the skills that I have of like no matter, and I even explain this to some of my players, and in something that people will be seeing soon that I have run on the internet. Um, I explain to my players in that game even. that like, you guys let me worry about, you guys just enjoy playing D&D. You let me worry about, the timing of everything, of where our session is going and what the beats that we want to hit and stuff. And, just understand that, I'm going to be totally calm to you, but inside my head, there is a hamster on a hamster wheel that is holding documents and coffee. And it's like, okay. And it's just,
I'm late, my whiskers,
yes.
I'm late.
Or it's sometimes it's like you may not have ever watched SpongeBob, but there's of the very many famous scenes and pictures from SpongeBob is a bunch of SpongeBobs that are in a filing like an office area, and the office is on fire, and they're like carrying documents, and they're all running around while the office is on fire, and they're
Mhm.
trying to like get stuff done. It's a representation of the inside of SpongeBob's mind, I think. Sometimes that, but anyway, yeah, no, definitely, 100%. Just if things go off the rails, no, they didn't. These were the rails the whole time.
That was always my plan. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
would be interested in hearing. It sounds like that was one of the stories that you mentioned of sticking with things or like recovering from railroads going off. But you have another. Do you?
I'll give you three quick ones.
Hmm.
So well, I'll do one. I'll do one that was the biggest problem, one that was
Okay,
recent that was resolved, and then one that's funny. So,
great.
the one that was the biggest problem was some years ago. My wife was in a campaign. Oh, and I don't think I've told this story on here before. If I have, I apologize. But my wife was in a campaign with me with a different dungeon master.
I did
Um,
not know this. I
yeah.
don't know that your wife ever played D&D.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, she actually really likes D&D. It's just a matter of, timing and getting her to play
Right,
things. But
right.
yes.
Okay, cool.
So and she was playing a druid, and we
Mm.
were in a campaign with her then roommate actually, and a bunch of her roommate's friends. And she was having a good time. It was basically her first real D&D experience that wasn't associated with me in any way other than the fact I was a player, but I wasn't DMing or anything.
Hmm.
And there was this one sequence where she was going to be, she was a druid and she was going to get a chance to go to this place and like consult with this archdruid and like end up sort of recognizing her destiny a little bit. And she was very
Wow.
excited about it. But it involved going through this series, a couple of series of places that were very dangerous, where there wasn't a lot of information about what was in those areas.
Hmm.
And the other people in the group absolutely refused to go. And the reason they absolutely refused to go is because in a previous campaign, they had had a similar situation with this dungeon master where there had been miscommunication and all of their characters basically, it was basically a TPK thing where all their characters died because there was a miscommunication with what was handled. And even though the DM now swore up and down this wasn't the same situation, da, 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 they were like, no. Now, I think the players should have honestly, kind of like they're all adults. Like, come on, guys, like let's get it together. And it was really upsetting for my wife, and like she cried about it. It was just it was one of those like, and the campaign kind of fell apart soon afterwards. That was an
Mm.
example of where the lack of trust with the players with that other DM eventually led to this campaign going off the rails. This is
Yeah.
another reason why there should have been a session zero. There's all kinds of
Yeah.
things that went wrong about that campaign that I would have done differently if I were DMing, but it is
Yeah.
what it is. So that's an example of something where they couldn't correct because there was just too much water under that bridge, to kind of go and fix it later on.
Hmm.
All right. Second scenario, and actually this only happened a couple of months ago. I'm running the campaign that I run on the GOG Comms Twitch channel with my group called By the Dice Roll. This is the one that did the D&D group in London, and that has been playing Ghosts of Saltmarsh. There is this one section where they have arrived at this mysterious abbey, and there's a set of these kind of they don't know what they are, but it's not too much of a spoiler to say that they're evil clerics. That's probably a pretty much guess. Who have been held there by these skeletons that rose up and ended up like revolting against them. And there's a long story as to what happens.
Hmm.
But so the rest of the party is fighting, and one of the player characters, who is one of the newer ones, is playing kind of a pacifist druid. Really fun character. It's actually a turtle and
Cool.
which you should be familiar with,
Yeah.
but is playing this pacifist druid. And when the players were like, when the characters were going out, they were like, killing these guys because they were evil clerics and whatever. And the player was genuinely shocked because all of the previous D&D campaigns they had played, and they hadn't played like 15 of them, but they had played a couple, never involved lethal damage. No, I've never encountered that before.
Whoa.
I was like, wait, what? And she was like, yeah, they were like, I was really thrown off because like, I just didn't realize that that was what was going to happen. Like, I just thought that and so now everyone was super worried about what everyone else was going to think then. Like all of
Mm.
these players, because everybody's friends, everybody likes each other. And they were all like, oh my God, well, we didn't know. And I was like, I didn't, but and so what ended up happening was it became this moment where everyone was able to recognize something about that character. They were able to not lethally manage one of the characters, and it gave them a chance to sort of talk with each other about what they actually believed in. Afterwards, the player was like, I'm not upset at all. Like I totally, it was, they said, I just didn't know. And everyone else like, we totally get it, but we didn't know. And so everyone
Mm.
sort of worked things out together, where it provided a real insight into everyone's character and how these things operated. But what was a lesson for me was, you're never going to know all of these things. I just had never run into someone who literally didn't know that a lot of D&D could involve actually lethal damage to other people.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about like, neutral like beasts that you're killing en masse. We're talking about evil clerics that are, bad people doing bad
Yeah.
things. Um, and so like it all worked out, but it worked out because the players were mature and because we were all able to be like, wait, let's all take stock. How are we all feeling? Like, where did everyone got? So it worked out, but it could have been really bad. But it was an example of where there was enough trust. Again, there's
Hmm.
that word built up that it didn't become a problem, but it could have been. Final story,
Wow.
which is very short. Character many, many years ago, when one of my first campaigns was the type of character that was the rogue that nobody likes, constantly grabbing
Hmm.
stuff from people, not stealing stuff
Oh.
from people, but always grabbing the treasure before other people did, and then
Hmm.
is like really agile and so dodges out of the way before they can hit them and like blah 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 blah. I would never have allowed this kind of a character now, but it was when I was, I was in high school and I was just learning to DM and whatever.
Yeah.
So they're going through this area and they see by this pool of water this glowing trident. And they were like, oh, and they were like, clear. They like trident. Now this is a rogue, right? I don't know about those of you who have played some D&D. Not a common like, rogue weapon, a
No.
trident doesn't exactly. But this one is like, oh, it's shiny and I want it, right? Because that's the way my character is. So
Hmm.
grabs the trident. Well, the trident is a trident of yearning. And for those of you who don't know what a trident of yearning is, a trident of yearning, assuming you fail your wisdom saving throw, which this person did by a mile, you have a desperate desire to plunge yourself in the largest body of liquid nearby, conveniently placed right near this body of liquid. But the body of liquid was not a body of water. This was a trap. It is extraordinarily strong acid. The
Oh.
person dives right into the acid, like just destroyed. Now, the person was absolutely furious, and every one of the players was like, outstanding. Like they were just like I didn't even have a chance to sort of work things out because the guy was like, how could you? And they were like, well, if it isn't the consequences of my actions. They just would not let the guy, and the guy was real, and the guy actually ended up not being part of the campaign going forward, like, kind of
Mm.
stopped coming. So that was an example of something I had not planned on that. I
Mm.
probably would have avoided, I wouldn't have put that trap there without obvious suggestions later on. I was playing it off of a pre-written module and whatever.
Mm.
But in the end, although it went off the rails, it was kind of a karma check, right, for these people. And it was a reminder that in this situation, the problem had not been me. The problem had been not being able to earlier on sort of screen out a player that was going to do stuff like this and then not laying down the rules strongly enough so
Yeah.
that I wasn't going to get a player who acted like that. And so when they went off the rails, it was like richly deserved, ultimately, like what happened to them. So those are three examples. One in which the campaign came to an end, and that was really sad. And that was the example with my wife. Went
Hmm.
off the rails, they couldn't save it. Second was where it could have gone off the rails were it not for the level of trust that everybody had and the awareness that, wow, we sometimes can't plan for everything. And then the instant karma is going to get you of the person grabbing the trident and jumping into a pool of acid, which
Oh.
was just that went off the rails, but it should have gone off the rails because the person should never been in the campaign in the first place.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love those. Very, very different,
Very
very
different kinds of stories.
unique stories too. And reminds me of the fact that our that D&D and the memories that we make while we play it are stored in the same part of the brain as our real life
Yeah,
memories,
totally.
and so totally understandable how in the first scenario, that of course, like if you're a meaningful story for your character and all the other players refuse to trust that the DM has learned from their mistake and go do it, of course that's upsetting. And then of course, these situations happen where you're discussing how to resolve the fact that someone didn't expect to use lethal damage. That is a moral quandary that, by the way, that has come up many, many times,
Hmm.
and actually constantly comes up whenever I'm running for kids and teens. I do my best to, well, I think it's an important moral quandary to have, you know,
Totally.
and
It's one of those things that you just wouldn't from experienced players. You just sort of have a certain expectation
yeah,
of what's
yeah.
likely. It
But
was the
even,
surprise. It was that they didn't even
yeah,
know. That was the thing that,
yeah. I did find that funny, by the way, where the one player is like, "We're killing them. We're With lethal damage.
everyone
I've
else is
never
sort of
been in a
like
campaign.
holding the dripping
Everyone's like,
bloody
yeah,
axe.
like
Like,
pulling their sword
should we? Yeah, I know.
blood out of the
It was so like I turn the axe to the flat of the blade. Oh
I
God.
did find,
I
yeah, that
mean,
was kind of funny. But
yeah, yeah.
but yeah. Anyway, no, those are all great. I think, yeah, I don't know. No stories particularly like that, jump to mind that our listeners haven't heard from me already, simply because those kinds of stories happen all the time at
Yeah.
tables for me. Um, Whether it's, I mean, even just yesterday when I was running, I spoke maybe that I had run a game for this group of kids for our children's program, these 10-year-olds. But every Sunday as well, I'm also running a teen campaign. And in that campaign, I have several neurodivergent teens who are great. They're wonderful. I love DMing for them. I do sometimes wonder, though, if they each have a very different vision of their best D&D session, what they want out of it. And one of the players is a really sweet kid, but he's he is so focused on his backstory stuff. It's almost, you could say, the only thing he sees is like like he'll walk in and I'll be like, "Hey, how's it going?" He'll be like, "It's good." So, this one backstory thing that I had. You just have to make sure, like, he'll constantly talk to me about his backstory, which I love as a DM. Like, the focus and attention that he brings of story and the things that he wants to see. And
Yeah.
then when I actually make the things happen in the story, he literally cannot contain his excitement. It's
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fulfilling
That
as a
that is
DM.
amazing. Yep, yep.
Yeah, like I love having him as a player because I wish everyone cared as much as he did about story.
Totally.
But at the same time, his focus is sometimes way too linear. With to In some cases to a degree where he almost cares not at all about anything else that anyone wants to do. And balancing that is very difficult. And so
Yeah.
we had, every session we have some difficulties, but last session we had a moment where everyone was kind of talking over each other, especially with teens. It's interesting the shift that happens with age where the kids will talk over each other very often, and I try to instill in them when I can the idea that everyone gets turns and you don't want to interrupt people and let people speak their piece. But when the kids talk to over each other, it's still kind of generally in good nature, and they either don't care or they understand or they wait and they get their word in. But there's this weird schism that happens at the teenage where they start to understand that each person should get to talk, but then the emotions surrounding being interrupted are much more personal,
Mm.
and or more sensitive in my experience, where kids are interrupting each other all the time, but it's just kind of in the same way that a toddler will trip over something or they'll fall and they'll hit their arm. And then they'll look at their parent. And if their parent reacts like, "Oh no, you've hurt yourself. Oh no," then the toddler will cry, right? But if the parent laughs and is like, "Oh, you okay?" then the toddler laughs. I feel like there's this kind of, we're off on a tangent here, but with the kids, the idea of falling and interrupting and being wild and being exciting and being crazy and letting all this energy out is just sort of in the nature of being a kid and in the nature of the tables that they play at. And so they're all kind of fine with it. But then with the teens, a single interruption or a misunderstanding or something like that can build resentment or cause an argument. And
Yeah.
I think that has part to do with the fact of the age that they're in and they're going through changes of many various kinds and starting to learn what it means to be an adult. And anyway, um, that is all off the railroad, and I think um, being a DM in those moments is just as much about getting the story back to where the story needs to be as it is being a human getting the table to a point of resolution.
Yeah.
And it seems like each of those stories that you've told, even the one with the trident and all that, is less about the story. I mean, maybe the story going a certain way was the cause of something that happened at the table, but ultimately the effect was a human effect that needed to be solved by humans.
Yes.
Or
Yes. Well,
in the
because that's
case
a
of the first one, wasn't solved. But yeah.
yeah, I mean, well, but that right, which is sort of instructive about what happens when you don't deal with these on a human level. I mean,
Hmm.
like that's the thing, right? Is that these things are always proxies, for in a way for emotions that you're experiencing in real life. Even if you're doing something where, you're playing a certain character and you're having an adventure and it's supposedly like escapism, there are elements that are very powerful. Like I'll actually give one other example of something that could have gone off the rails.
Yeah.
I had a big fight against a spider god avatar thing that
Yeah.
happened in my Eberron campaign, probably about a month ago or so. And one of the players had made clear that they are
Don't like
very much
spiders.
didn't like spiders. Yeah, I
I
talked
think
about
you
the same
mentioned
thing.
this.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, yeah, and I of course I remember that. I
Yeah.
had it right there in my
You're there
notes.
with your open book full of spider drawings and
Yeah,
spider
I was like,
mechanics of
well,
spider, and you're like, it's the same as when you're drawing the sword, pulling this bloody sword from.
did I say spider? I meant, yeah, yeah, exactly. But like and of course I remembered that, and I had remembered, they had a couple things, and I had been very careful about this. This campaign's been running, for like 15 levels at this point or whatever, and
Well,
I was like, so what I ended up doing was I literally just I mean the name of the character was Spinweave. So like it's like so I ended up covering the big thing was the visual. And so I ended up covering the visual on the channel and everyone in me and I was able to talk about because it is kind of a shadow god as well. So I was
Mm,
just like, this all sort of covered in shadow and it's all very like nondescript, it's all very obscured and like, and it created this sort of sense of sort of frightening horror in some people without having to go down that particular path. Now, partly my error that I had missed it, no one
yeah.
got super upset. No one was like, "How dare you?" They were like, "Okay, this is this thing," and I'm like, "Oh God, that's right. Okay." So I like immediately like cover over and roll 20, and it was fine. And I didn't need to make like this, the spider god makes using their 8 legs and their spinny eyes using
Hmm.
I didn't have to emphasize the spider nature of it because the things that they were doing tended to be it was almost more like a beholder than it was a spider anyway in terms of the way
Yeah.
they acted. And it was fine, and it ended up being completely fine, and it was not a problem at all. I had to, and I apologized afterwards again, and she was like, "Oh no, 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 that's totally fine. Like, you're juggling like 85,000 balls in the air, like it's not a big deal." So it was fine. But it was an example of I didn't panic. I didn't say like, "Oh, I got to cut scream." You're like, I didn't have to do any of that. I was like, okay, so I was like, oops, yeah, okay, let me deal with that. Let me address this, blah, 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 blah. And that again is just an example of, again, trust, but also being aware of, you talked about that idea of poise. It's not like I relied on the spidery nature of this is what makes it matter. And if you don't have a spider nature, then blah, blah, blah. Like it wasn't like that, right? It was just a big, powerful spider avatar shadow god. And I could emphasize shadow god without emphasizing spider avatar. Obviously, if I was running a whole campaign about Lolth, that would have been a whole different situation, but I would never have run that campaign because
Yeah.
obviously I knew about the whole, please no spiders thing. So that was something that I was able to get back in track because I didn't panic and because I knew enough to know there was more time than I thought that anyone would think to correct it. It wasn't like, oh my God, I made the mistake and then there's the error. you're not a Cirque du Soleil performer where one mistake could cause grievous harm, you know.
No.
You can make an error that you can correct as long as you don't panic and you
Mhm.
maintain that sort of poise. So,
Yep.
yeah, you know.
Yeah. And I think I guess the last thing I'll mention too with that is a good reminder that safety tools are important, session zeros are important,
Yep.
and establishing all those boundaries, but also remembering that, I don't think you should feel bad necessarily that you forgot that, because to be honest, in the vast majority of campaigns I've run, I think I've had one campaign where through the course of the campaign, someone approached me about adding a new line or a new veil,
Hmm.
um, in addition in the middle of the campaign.
Right, right, right.
And so that all to say that the majority of the campaigns I've run that have used lines and veils and safety tools and session zero and all that kind of stuff, people have established what they want or don't want or what they're comfortable with or not uncomfortable with at the very start. And yeah, totally human to forget that maybe some of the things that were mentioned are involved, especially if you're running something for that long or
Right,
if
right,
it's pre-written or not, or
right.
so yeah, that's just a part of playing the game. And I think also an example of like, yes, safety tools, very, very important. Do people sometimes forget things? Yes. Can we be adult and cordial about it? Can we find a
Exactly.
solution? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's why rolling with be having the lines of communication open so
Yep.
that those things can happen and can come up is very valuable. And recognizing that it really does have to be a line and veil that your players set for you, because there will sometimes be times where players will like kind of wince and be like, ooh, and you should be aware of it. But assuming you're like, you give them a second to kind of they will tell you, because a lot of times players do want to have like
Yeah.
to walk through a level of discomfort
Yeah.
that in a safe space where they can work some of these things out
Mm-hmm.
without having to go, oh, but this is real life and has real life implications. Like
Mm-hmm.
one the D&D as therapy, which is a thing,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes involves those kinds of desensitizations. So if you've done the lines and veils, if you've done the session zeros and used those kinds of safety tools, you know that you've got the protections against, I really can't handle this, like talking about child death or whatever. Like that's totally reasonable, right?
Yep.
But if on the other hand, if a player doesn't tell you that, I've had situations where the player's like, ooh, and they're like, all right, let's do this, because they do want to actually feel as
Yeah.
if they can go through this and they'll be safe in doing it. And sometimes if they quote conquer it, that has profound, powerful psychological effects for them.
Yeah.
Again, as a proxy for who they are emotionally. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally relate to that as well. The idea of like there are several times where I've been a player in campaigns, particularly home games, where certain themes have come up or certain descriptions have come up that made me uncomfortable. But we had safety tools in place, first of all. And then also, I think there's kind of on this little conversation of safety tools and lines and veils now. Um, I think there is a spectrum to it where either someone, if you, I guess, in some situations or some themes or certain topics, there's either people who are disturbed or made uncomfortable by it, basically not at all, or people who are phobic of it or whatever it happens to be,
Right.
and maybe fall in the middle. For myself, I like descriptions or depictions of blood make me uncomfortable, but not to the point that I'm outright like don't include it. And in that way, actually, when that happens, we know there is just like overt descriptions of blood or someone cutting themselves or something like that. Um, it does make me uncomfortable, but I kind of like it because it feeds into the feeling that my character would be feeling, or the feeling that moment is supposed to feel like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's like
Yes.
part of being human.
Yes. It really
Um,
builds strength, I think, for people when they
yeah.
feel that way. And again, you have to take your cue from the player. I have to emphasize that. You
Mhm.
have to take your cue from what the player says they feel comfortable with. It's not
Right.
your job to push them. You're not a therapist, actually. So it's not your
And
job as the DM to push them. However,
yeah.
if you are taking their cues and they're like, I think I can manage this, then you can manage it. And I think that has real power for them, because it can provide them a sort of model that they could then use elsewhere
Hmm.
in their lives. So
Yep. And then I guess that also means too that as adults and people, we're responsible for understanding what we are comfortable with. And now keeping in the caveat though that something may come up that you did not know you would be uncomfortable with.
Right.
So I think it's just yeah. We already all know
Yep.
this, or at
Yeah.
least
Yeah.
you and I,
Yep.
and agree on everything. That's
Yep.
why it's important to establish things beforehand, but then also have tools in
And to
place
check
that can
back
be
in.
used
Yep.
on hand,
Yep.
but yeah, there is definitely a place for uncomfortable themes of all sorts as a method of working through them in a safe space or a safe way. Um,
Yeah. So long as that's
anyway,
player driven, then that's,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, anyway, um, how long have we been doing this?
I think,
Do
yeah,
we have enough time for
I
another
was just
question?
trying to figure that out. Maybe if it's a quick one, I was
Yeah,
trying to figure out what we've got.
I think I have a quick one.
Okay.
Our Gen GMs vodcasts, you typically tend to go, you ask a deeply thought-provoking question, and then I'm like, what's your opinion about potatoes or something like that. And in the same theme,
Great.
here's my question.
Tater tots all the way.
Tater tots all the way or none at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term OC. This is more my generation than yours.
Orange County.
Oh no. Okay. So an OC is an original character,
Oh,
essentially.
okay.
And so I don't know if you've ever seen on social media that people will post like artwork of a character
Okay.
and then it'll say my OC or the OC or whatever.
Interesting.
So essentially it sounds like it's making it into this big thing, and it does have origins in making a character within an existing universe. So for
Okay.
example, people would say like this is my Star Wars OC. So it's in this existing universe that someone else has created, but it's my original character within that universe that I'm creating.
Okay.
Um, in this way, kind of all the D&D characters that we make are OCs, right? Or all the NPCs that we play are OCs. So my question is, I have OCs, and I guess the way that I um, categorize them or like recognize them as an original character for me is, I've had characters that I have played for a one shot or even for a campaign or things like that, but the characters that I really deem that are like my characters, like if I had to create a portfolio, or maybe not even a portfolio, but like a memory box or something like really meaningful, like if I had to pick them from a list, there are certain characters that have like, for example, like I've made a character in Pillars of Eternity that I really liked, and it was my character for my whole playthrough of Pillars of Eternity. And then I was like, when I went to go play Baldur's Gate 3, I was like, oh, let me just do a different version of Elf Paladin in this game, name it
Okay.
the same character, and then
Okay.
kind of like, so it's almost like you have your own multiverse of characters. So I have several OCs that like maybe one started as a D&D character, and I guess what's important to me is the element that maybe it could permutate to a different universe.
Sure. So
So
it's like a default character for you
kind
in
of
a way,
for
right?
you,
Okay.
yeah, like
A DC, if you will.
yeah, yeah. So this is like the version of this character in World of Warcraft, but here's their
Hmm.
D&D version, here's their Pillars of Eternity version.
Okay.
So I have several characters like that. And so in as a DM as well, what that means sometimes is I have, for example, there's a tiefling character that I have, a tiefling warlock, and I have made her recur in several games that I've run. Either I have played her as a player character, she was an NPC in a D&D campaign that I ran.
Okay.
I will, or a very classic Zac example of this is the talking bag of holding. That's like an OC of mine,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's like, I guess that's my most recurrent D&D OC, where it's like I will bring up this talking bag of holding if I ever need like comedic relief.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that all to say, do you have a recurring character or type of character that if I don't know, and sometimes this comes up too if you're in a D&D situation where you need to pull a character out of a hat real quick and you're like,
Hmm.
let me pull character number 12, the goofy astute scholar, and here's their version in this moment.
Okay.
So do you have characters that you tend to like pull on, or do you have like do you define your I guess it's slightly different than a toolbox, but it's kind of relatable.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so that's kind of my question to
Okay.
you. I don't know
So
if you
you're
have recurring
yeah,
characters or OCs or
totally. And you're
ideas.
you're
Yeah,
talking about kind of like really NPCs that I can pull out, right?
probably
And
more in your case, yeah.
as opposed to playing,
But I
one way or
guess
the other.
the last thing I'll add too is like when you play video games, though, when you play something like Pillars or a game that lets you make your own character,
Yep.
do you tend to make, I always make, you know, Jimbo Bob, the orc barbarian, whenever
Ah,
I get a
Jimbo Bob.
chance?
My favorite.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so on the video game side, yes. And it's usually one of two characters. I always like to build an extremely charismatic ranger or sorcerer. And
Oh,
the ranger is always called Arvin Elrond, which is funny.
oh, is
Because it's
that the
based
origin of
the
that?
origin of the character, well, the origin is a character from my first novel, actually, who
Oh,
was himself a forest walker, which was kind of like a ranger insert,
mhm,
basically, from Lord of the Rings,
okay.
whose name was Arvin Elrond. And
Okay, that's an
that,
OC of
yeah, yeah,
yours
yeah. So
then.
that
Yeah,
was an OC quite literally,
yeah.
that came out in 2009 or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so that was so yes, that was as a player character, I like that. I always like them to be charismatic because I love, especially in RPGs, games where I can persuade or convince people to do things based upon force of will. Like, and I think I may have told the story before, like end of Mass Effect 1, being able to convince Saren to not go ahead with the
Spoilers.
plan that he was planning on doing
Yeah, yeah,
is just the best. Like, especially when in my case, I got them to a high enough Paragon level literally just before meeting him in the final big
yeah,
sequence. I was
yeah.
like, that was awesome. And then Arcanum of Steamwork and Magic Obscura. Some people may be aware of this older game by Troika. Very cool game, janky, but like very interesting. A lot of interesting elements of it. But there too, you could make a character so charismatic that you can kind
Mhm.
of convince the boss at the end that maybe they've made the wrong decision, which I think is tremendous. Like I love doing stuff like that. So
Yeah.
in terms of like traits and ideas and concepts, like for sure. Very cool about, by the way, of Arcanum. In that game, you have either magic or science, and the
Hmm.
more magic-y that you are, the less effective your science skills are, and the
Yeah.
more strong you can be on the magic side, and the less effect those things have on you. So very interesting
That's
combinations.
cool.
Anyway, so yeah, that's for me as a player in video game stuff. As far as a DM, yes, I have a couple of default types that I go through.
Hmm.
One of them is the arguing either soldier group or the arguing merchant group. Like one of my
Ah,
favorites is the
yes.
arguing merchant brothers, who are like
Oh.
I had these from my Tyranny of Dragons thing where I had two identical twin dwarf brothers on either side of the street, and one ran the smithy for armor and one ran the smithy for weapons, and
Oh,
each
great.
one said that the other one didn't know what the hell they were doing and like don't go to my brother, and they both are like actually exceptionally good at like producing their own work, but they
Yeah.
basically just, and like so my players love that. They love to go back and forth. You know what he said
Oh.
about you? And he's like, I tell him what he meant. So, and they're always Scottish, very important.
Yeah. Very
So
important.
there's that. And then the second one, the second OC of that type is the swearing either caravan leader or merchant, sort of like the swearing merchant, sort of the middle manager type, who's
Hmm.
sort of likable but is always just kind of generally grouchy and pissed off about everything.
Hmm.
So there's a character in Tyranny of Dragons called Arsheni, who is this caravan leader, and his big thing was he just swore all the time. So he
Hmm.
so they would come up to it, he'd be like, and they'd be like, "God damn, get these goddamn horses off the goddamn thing! I can't give a crap about the ba ba da ba da ba da ba da," using
Hmm.
stuff that was stronger than crap, etc. And
Yeah.
they got to just love the fact. So what I would do then is they spent some time with Arsheni doing the caravan thing. Then they went off and did their own thing. But later on, I did a callback where they were in this area where the caravan could have passed by, and like they're like kind of lost. They can't find something. I'm like, in the distance you hear, well, god damn it. They're like, Arsheni, and they like are like they're like yelling swears. They're like, Arsheni, god damn it, where the hell are you? Because they know that was
Oh
great. And
man.
like, so being able to pull out the swearing merchant type is also, one of my OCs. Last one that's really good too is the informant who knows more than he's telling and is kind of seedy and sketchy, and you don't know if you can trust him, except generally he does have good information, but it's always like, Does he have an agenda when he tells you the information? And this is directly taken from a character that I wrote about in Gray Shade, one of my novels from a few years ago, of a character who is exactly like that, an informant called Rumor, who I
Mm.
loved writing. He was a character that knows so much about everybody in the city, and everyone hates him, but no one can kill him because he knows too much about everybody else.
Oh
I
man.
love that kind of a character. And he has, like, broken teeth, and he kind of wheedles and whines a lot, and he's like, no one ever understands old Rumor, that sort of thing. And like again, my players love running into a character like this because
Mm.
he just is very visceral to them. Like, he feels very real. They understand what he's about, and they sort of almost get slightly protective of him, as much as they also are pissed off about him all the time, because
Mm.
he does have all this knowledge. So the seedy informant for sure, the swearing merchant, and the twin, like, merchant brothers that are always yelling about how the other one doesn't know what they're doing.
Oh, that's
Those are
awesome.
three for sure,
Do
that
you
I love.
so but you don't have a named character that you will on occasion shoehorn into
As a
situations?
DM, no. I don't
Mm.
have like the equivalent of like an Elminster, like, Ed Greenwood would throw
Right.
into a bunch of
Yes, that's
things, or
another
like,
example.
no, I don't.
Hmm.
That's an interesting thing. I guess the example would be maybe in my Forbidden Library universe, lot like callbacks to previous characters. So like, for
Oh, okay.
example, Thaddeus Caleriton, who is like the head of school.
Hmm.
Like, that's a callback that I would give to several people in different eras, that they're sort of like they've heard of this Thaddeus Clareton or whatever, but
Mm.
not necessarily showing him directly. No, that's an interesting one. No, not as such. As a player,
Mm.
yes. As a DM, no. I generally switch stuff around, so that they're going to have a different experience, but the types are the same. Like,
Yeah.
I may call them, Knob and Bob or whatever. It might be the dwarven merchants. I wouldn't call them that, but but
Mm.
like, when you run into two identical dwarven merchants, I wouldn't call them that,
I
but
see.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
I think that the interesting difference is that
you literally have
I
a named character that you bring
yeah,
back.
I literally have several named characters
Wow.
that if I ever need to, and I don't want to do this so often that it starts to then break the, because it'd be kind of cheap if, like, why is this guy what's the life story of this guy? First he's in Ravnica, now he's in Eberron, now
Is
he's
he the
in,
Sandman? Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I
I
know.
like to think though that there's like different multiverse iterations of this person,
It's a
is I
neat
guess
world
the way
building
that I
trick though for
justify it.
you.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a neat world building trick. If that is a tying together character, I can imagine
Oh.
players being like, "Oh, like, how
Yeah.
connected are these worlds?"
Yeah,
So
no. I've never actually done that. I always will say that this is a different permutation or a different version of, like, of that person,
like a
like
multiverse thing
a
almost.
multiverse thing basically.
Interesting.
So a clear example is I have a Minotaur. So when COVID hit, ran D&D for some of my high school. I call them my School of Rock kids because they were the first cohort of kids that in sixth grade started the very first D&D club in our town
Okay.
at the middle school. And then when they went to high school, formed the first D&D club at the high school,
Okay.
which is the one that I continue. They are now first year college students,
Okay.
um, and are actually the very same ones that your daughter had played with. And so they, when I ran that campaign for them through Zoom, because COVID hit and I was just helping out with the club after school, but then all these kids had nothing to do. D&D was over, so I'd like reached out to the parents and I was like, "Hey, I could run D&D for the kids over the summer through Zoom, because 2020." And they were all like, "Yeah, that'd be great." And so I kind of created my own sort of like Wizarding Academy, kind of like a Hogwarts sort of thing, and wanted that to be like the hub area. And so I needed a headmaster. I went through and, was kind of creating all the different
Yeah,
roles
yeah.
of, like, modeled somewhat after, Hogwarts, Dumbledore, and like I could just kind of go list by list, or modeled also after my university experiences. And so I created this headmaster, Minotaur named Tarak Dorn. And I described him as he basically would appear like this very large, imposing bull's head. And he would wear a black wizard's robe. And he would have it covering his whole body. He would have it furled fully across himself at all times. such that he would often appear just like a black cylinder with a minotaur's head on top of it, and he would just
Awesome.
sort of like float around.
Awesome.
And this deep, imposing voice, and he would rarely show up, and just this powerful, legendary wizard, this minotaur, which I thought was so cool. Later, so this character first appeared and was like the first. When you can imagine in this campaign I ran through Zoom, they all arrive at the academy, which is a sky city, by the way. They take a sky ship and they arrive at the dock.
I remember my daughter
Um,
talking about this. Yeah.
yes, they arrive at the dock, and this actually, yeah, this was the exact campaign that your daughter was in. Um, they arrive at the dock, and there's a tiefling counselor who is the one that accepts them at the dock. If I was a very great fan of Harry Potter, not so much anymore, but in my youth, very much so. So I remember distinctly a scene in the movies where, as the kids arrive on the boat to Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall is the one that greets them there and sort of
Hmm.
escorts them to the Great Hall.
Hmm.
And so I did a bit of a parallel to that, and I was like, okay, all right, when these new, students to the Wizarding Academy arrive, who's going to greet them? So I created this counselor character named Serena Fane, who was a tiefling, a pale, absolute, like ghostly white tiefling with long white horns, but young, and kind of you're questioning how she has achieved this station at her young age.
Hmm.
Later was inspired by, um, oh God, Quincy Jones, who a very famous musician and
Yeah.
behind the albums of
Producer.
Michael
Yeah.
Jackson and
Passed away
producers, all that.
recently.
Yeah, Quincy Jones has 7 daughters, I think, with almost as many wives, as in like that they almost all their mothers are different, and each of his daughters are like, one's an actress, one's a singer, like they've famous daughters. And then there was this documentary about Quincy Jones where all of his daughters came together for like a little family reunion, and there he is, this old man in his seat, and his 7 daughters, who are all like powerhouses in their own industries, are all around him. So then I was like, oh, okay. Then I took that parallel and I was like, what if Serena Fane is one of 7 daughters of this like silver tongued tiefling guy, or something like
That's
that?
cool.
Both Serena Fane, this counselor tiefling, and Tarak Dorn, the Minotaur headmaster, I have reused in several other contexts that weren't this campaign. So Tarak Dorn, when I ran my 75 session Strixhaven campaign, which I actually just finished recently, Tarak Dorn was the NPC that I made the headmaster of Strixhaven, replacing the one that the Strixhaven book came with. Because I was like already familiar with my Minotaur NPC. He's cool. Let's just do that
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so anyway, yeah, I kind of do this schism, or like the bag, Baggins or Satchel, the bag of holding that talks, is
Yep.
also one that
I remember
originated
hearing
in
about
that
Satchel.
campaign, but
Yeah.
have reused many times. So yeah, yeah, I have several OCs, and I feel they're very cool, and
That's cool.
it is an easy thing for me as a DM, a kind of a cheat code that I like, where if I'm running for a different table or a different group of people, especially if it happens very often. It's not often that I need to throw an OC or a recurring character into a one shot, because usually I have the one shot prepared. But if a campaign happens and then something happens where I'm like, huh, we could use an interesting NPC here. Oftentimes I will just kind of pull from that list and be like, oh, you see a tiefling woman there, or you
That's cool.
see a minotaur or something.
And
So
it's almost and it really is kind of a signature for you, like a
exactly,
signature. Yeah, that's cool.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool. No, that's
So
interesting. I think because the campaigns are very different from each other,
mhm.
I have not typically thought about, having a particular character that's sort of in the background. But that's an interesting idea, having someone that can be pulled out for use with different things, especially like because I tend to do a lot of almost like repertory theater with similar groups. Like you've played, campaigns with me with similar groups of people. My Infinity and Beyond crew, there are some changes like tweaks, but a lot of them are people that have been with me for a while.
Mhm.
By the Dice Roll group, same thing. And so for a lot of those folks, it would be
Yeah.
interesting to bring back those characters, but at the same time, they'd be like, "We've seen
Be
this before,"
yeah,
you know.
that's weird. Yeah.
But I like the element of this sort of signature character. That's neat. That's neat.
Hmm.
OC, interesting.
Yes.
I'll
Well,
have to
welcome to
go
the modern age.
now.
Well, that's
Yeah,
the
now
thing.
now I
Now, when
clearly
you go
know. I mean,
on Twitter or Blue Sky or any of those,
gotta
and
go
you
find the
see,
OC. Yeah.
yeah, it's usually tied to artwork, because then people will get artwork including I have done this. So I have, there's one particular artist, shout out to Elena or Leanne. She goes by both names. Kyoto's Party is her handle on several social medias. And she's a wonderful artist who has a Patreon where every month she'll give you a very, very nice sketch. She calls it a sketch. I look at it and I'm like, this is a full piece of art.
Yeah.
And she'll give you a sketch of any character you want. And so most people will do it for their D&D characters. And when you're subscribed to her Patreon, I mean, I actually, at the moment, I'm not. I want to go back in. But what kept happening is a month was would happen, and I'd be like, oh crap, I got to put together references for another character, for another character, for another, you know. So eventually I ran out, but I had her draw all of these recurring characters. So I have art of Serena Fane. I have art of a dark elf character that has recurred in several campaigns of mine, and I played once named the Prisoner, who is a drow character who has tattoos of all these different names on his body, on his chest and shoulders, and his mouth is sewn shut, and so he can't cast spells, and he wears dimensional shackles which prevent you from teleporting away. And the story of the Prisoner is that he was a wizard who was captured and condemned and prevented from spellcasting, but he escaped. And the writing that's on his body is all the names of all the people that have wronged him, and then once he has taken them off the list, they were removed as a tattoo.
Nice.
And the very central one on his back is the Raven Queen. It's like, when is he going to do
Oh,
that? You know.
nice.
So
Nice.
I've had that character come up before, and it's just kind of, that's my dip into horror. Like, you know, this guy with his mouth sewn shut and all this stuff, and like when he wants to talk, sometimes the text of the tattoos will change to write out the words he wishes to say.
Wow.
So, you know, there's, when you have a cool idea like that, that's the other thing, is like such a cool thematic expression of a character. Once I feel like I've solidified that into what it is, and discovered it, then I'm just like, gotta reuse this.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Yeah,
like,
no, no joke.
you know,
No joke. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
yeah. But that's a similar with your dwarf brothers. I think you should, yeah, that should be your thing now. I mean,
I should do
it's
that.
been your thing, but like,
Yeah, like actually name them as a thing.
yeah, exactly. That's
You
what
know,
if I were you, that's what I would, that's always
yeah,
what I do, is like, their names are this and this, and they appear, you know.
I could see that
They
for
could
sure.
even be plainer traveler merchants, you know. But
That's yeah, interesting. That's it. Yeah, that's cool.
I'm surprised you haven't thought about this before. But yeah.
No, I get, well, I think just because the campaigns tend to be the same people but so different in
Yes.
terms
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the actual adventure style.
That
You
makes a
know,
lot of sense.
that sort of is a different mindset, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to build out the Arvin Elrond multiverse.
That's right.
Because then that could be
The
your
cinematic
signature.
universe, the
Yeah, that could be your
AECU.
signature. It's like we know that we're in an Arvin Elrond campaign when we meet the Dwarven brothers. Even if we're the same players that are in for, okay, now we're starting
Yep.
Mysterious Peaks, right? Like,
Yep.
ah, there's the Dwarven brothers. All right, we're
Yeah, yeah,
Greg's got
we
us.
know.
Greg's got us.
We know it's like
You know?
it's like the M. Night Shyamalan, or like like showing up as like
Yeah.
like a just a kind of cameo role in like some part of the
Yes.
film, and you're like, aha, or
Uh-huh.
like
Or
yeah,
who's the guy who does lens flares all the time?
J.J. Abrams, right? Like
Yeah,
doing that, yeah.
or explosions with Michael Bay.
Yep,
But
yep,
yeah,
yep. No,
yeah, you
that's
gotta
cool. All right,
gotta have your thing.
I have my marching orders now. I have to
Yeah,
do a
yeah,
scene
and
for
now
there.
you can talk to your daughter about OCs. She'll understand.
Yeah, well, I already remember the cat because I remember Satchel, because she made, she thought it was
Yes,
very funny at the
she
time.
probably has her own, and
Yeah,
she'd
I would
be
imagine.
probably
Was the
familiar with
even the
the.
characters that she did from that time, she really was fond of that particular
Yes,
character.
yeah,
So
but
it's a mark of
it's not like every D&D character you make though becomes one. Like sometimes I make one and then I'm like, that was good for this one shot, but I'm not like bonded to the
totally.
idea.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
There is a character that I did for a campaign that was run by Mike Underwood from the Valorword campaign,
Hmm.
um, that I really liked because he was this sort of honor driven, this bravo, who is like, sort of this really good combat based knight, who is like as a bravo, he's sort of like, he has a lot of these flourishes, and the I gave him this sense of an accent so that he was impressed with what he could do. But there were times when he would grow deadly serious, and normally at those times there would be moments where his eyes would sort of focus in the distance, and he would say it is when he hears this sound that he grows particularly concerned about the moment that he's there. And like there were a couple of very badass moments. One of them was like pulled directly out of basically Blade, where
Mm.
like just the Chris Christopherson character, like the mentor character for Blade, is always something that was really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
And like having that moment where he's like talking with this priest, and he's just like basically like father, you should have known this would happen when you first trained me. And it all, and Mike was the GM, and Mike was like, what? Because they had no idea that that's the sort of, until I set it up, and they rolled with the punches, but they were like, that was really good. Like I did not know the reveal was that this guy who was like the spiritual mentor was actually more than a spiritual mentor. Like he had actually helped train him in some combat thing. Like so
Mm.
I loved that. But
Yeah.
anyway, that was a character that I really got into. But yes, there are other characters that I'm like, that was good, for whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's the great thing about D&D, right? Or about any tabletop game is that you'll have a lot of characters throughout the course of your life. So
Yeah.
during the course of a session, which we must come to the end of now,
Yes,
because
we must.
we've run well. But this was very, very good, very intriguing.
Mhm.
And I hope that you, dear listeners slash watchers, found it intriguing as well. And I hope you will do two things. Number one, we hope that you will send us some feedback and some questions and things you'd like us to consider. And I also hope you will spread the word and subscribe to us on YouTube. We are closing in on 100 subscribers. Remember, at 500 subscribers, Zach will explain his glasses. So if you want that kind of like, scintillating content, you need to make sure you do that. But please do like the videos that we have on there. We have some new shorts coming out from our friend Live Suing. So please do like that. Please spread the word. Please follow us on Blue Sky and on X for as long as that place exists. But definitely follow us on Blue Sky and subscribe to us on YouTube. And we will see you. Oh, and again, if you're in Southwestern Connecticut, this will come out before then. Definitely April 11th, you'll get a chance to see Zach and myself in person doing the finale of the Limited Run Hearthglow podcast, where you'll get to see more of Zach's Turtle Druid Elder
Yeah.
Hagen. And all of that you'll get to see at Sacred Heart, the Shine Auditorium, 4 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Friday, April 11th. So we'll try to live stream it. We think we can, but the best way to make sure you see it is to go see it yourself
Yeah.
and in person. So please introduce yourself to us. We'd love to see you and all that good stuff. And otherwise, join us on GenGM's YouTube channel, and we will see you next time for more GM tips and tricks. That was Zach over there.
And that was Greg over there. Yeah.
Bye bye, everyone. We'll see you soon.
See you soon.